Variables, City Transition and Street-Based Sex Work in Bangalore, published by Cambridge University Press, delves into neoliberal urban transition and digital experience among street-based sex workers in Bangalore. His other books include Social Context of Technological Experience and Industrial Innovation, Networks, and Economic Development. Both have been published by Routledge in 2020 and 2015 respectively. In addition to this, as the principal violinist of the Bangalore School of Music Chamber Orchestra, he is also involved in the Western music, classical music scene in Bangalore. We welcome Professor Kamath here and request him to deliver his lecture.
Thank you for coming. What I'm going to speak to you about today is the work that we have done over the last 3 years or so at the National Institute of Advanced Studies where I work. I'm part of the Inequality and Human Development program in that university and in that institution, and many of my colleagues did in that program. Many of my colleagues did work on migration, on climate, on gender, on aggregation, electoral processes, and the work that I did along with another colleague was on technology and inequality. So I'm going to speak about the work that we have done. Now, I'm going to speak to you about some concerns about the relationship between socio-economic inequality and technology. In this talk, I will first lay the ground about what the pressing questions are. I then move on to some conceptual issues, and after raising several themes of interest throughout the first part, I'll then move on to how certain technological practices are actually weapons against inequality and socioeconomic distress, and how we must accept these practices as genuine technological empowerment. Now, technology has emerged as one of the principal drivers of modernity, of empowerment and prosperity. But the greater part of the research on technology and development in India has restricted to 3 things: the quantifiable, the economic, and the tangible. And only very few studies and almost no policy documents have departed from this trinity. Debates, analyses, and commentaries and statistics around formal R&D, industrial innovation, digital and information technology-led interventions, similar themes, all these take up the larger share of academic and policy studies. So there's very little and almost nothing about socioeconomic inequality and technology. So we have 2 questions that we need to be wedded. The first question is, what has been the instrumentality of inequalities on technological engagement? And the second question is, what has been the instrumentality of technologies in coping up or even mitigating inequalities? Now, socioeconomic inequality is an ambience within which technology comfortably operates within. Technology is a contributor to the forces that cause inequality, as well as a participant in the mitigation of these of inequality. Now, such tangible and complex socio-technological realities are given only a passing mention in technocratic policy formulations about the role of technology and development in India. They are overlooked by technology vision statements in the state, and they are mostly missing in the strategies and conversations around these supposed technological revolutions. Technologies are conceptualized as individual goods, as social goods, and as global goods, and they've naturally earned a significant place in the daily lives of people everywhere. So there arises the question of whether we sincerely wish technology to improve individuals' microclimates in a macro landscape of aggravating inequality. Now, in reality, technologies enter and operate within complex sociological and political ecologies. Technology is largely as such a social practice that often mirrors social differentiation by being structured through social categories such as gender, class, location, ethnicity, and so on. And technology therefore also feeds back into those sociological relations. But it is ultimately the visual pageantry of individually owned digital gadgetry and so on that usually ends up emerging as an exhibition of technological modernity. Unfortunately, what has been enthusiastically showcased as modernity is actually the spectacle of technical materiality. And to top it, the state and its policy-making processes subscribe mostly to an elite technocratic construction of technology that easily reproduces and perpetuates existing inequality. In the context of India, Dipankar Gupta, for instance, has argued that modernity has been mistakenly equated all too routinely with the possession and symbolic visibility of artifacts, and with little in the way of actually dismantling regressive socioeconomic conditions and improving social ethics, merit, equity, and justice. And one of the prime reasons for these mistaken notions of modernity is that the technical and the social are separately studied. Andrew Feinberg explains on how the fate of society is bound to our understanding of technology, and therefore its repercussions on inequality and development as well, which is why a shallow understanding of technology can result in the preservation and reproduction of social structures, hierarchies, and their resultant economic processes. A natural question that arises is whether and how technology can convert, transform, and translate into capabilities and functionings for human dignity, for human excellence, and human enhancement. So modernity, therefore, should not be just a numerical figure of technological device ownership, but freedom and agency in the rightful sense. Capability and associated functionings do not mean only operational technological skills, which even gig workers have, but those which actually append life opportunities. Deprivation should therefore imply whether an individual suffers restrictions, both internal and external, and is not in a position to convert, translate, and transform from technology to capabilities and functionings. But all is not gloom and doom. Inequality can indeed be tackled by ushering in processes that convert technology into progressive choices, when technological inclusion works in tandem with socio-economic inclusion. For this, we need to start away from the center and move towards the bottom. We need to restate and reanalyze and re-expand technology from the urban, metropolitan, industrial, economic, white-collar, corporate to a subaltern gaze of technology. A serious worm's eye view of technology is in want, and we need to ask whether the participation in the technological revolutions for the subaltern has really facilitated empowerment, or has it only meant setting up small businesses and so on. We need to understand that technological inequalities often manifest more as intangible differences, which cannot be simply rectified by material or asset redistribution, much more than as tangible differences, which can be reduced or even removed by redistribution. Coming to technology, inequality, and industry, governments all over the world have avowed a technology-centered development trajectory, which has been adopted for several decades now by developing countries in East and Southeast Asia, and also in Latin America. In India, technological progress has been the undercurrent of all 5-year plans and has taken spotlight, especially after 1991. And today, digital technology ecosystems are at the heart of development strategies in India through the digitization of governance and economy and a preparation for Industry 4.0. But marginalized social groups such as Dalits, transgender individuals, indigenous peoples, migrants, and so on, do not always have the requisite access to beneficial networks and markets, and they are left to operate in informal casual settings. They don't possess the means and opportunities to overcome vulnerabilities unless they are politically connected, or unless they happen to be fortunate enough to capture some opportunities in small business sectors. Such social groups are pushed into the torrents of market capitalism, and they are left to survive there deeper into vulnerability and precarity. So digital revolutions, for the most part, just bypass them, reinforcing their exclusion or even creating new forms of marginalization for them. Empirical evidence has shown that digital technologies can actually easily further caste-based exclusion, that female employable workers are very likely to be disadvantaged in new technological arrangements due to practices of everyday patriarchy. Merely fluent operation of high-tech digital gadgetry such as a smartphone does not guarantee technological citizenship and economic participation. And for that matter, even low-cost technologies may not necessarily fight inequality, since technologies are often reflections and amplifications of social inequities. For tens of millions of people, with no exaggeration, the permeation of digital technology has greatly meant only further surveillance, alienation, control, and exploitation instead of expanded agency and the realization of civil and labor rights. And this is easily seen in contemporary digital labor markets such as gig economy work. So the crafting of technology-centered development trajectories rarely has reflected upon these realities, possibly even in denial of these actualities, perhaps even wishing them away. This is because, what I said in the beginning, what is usually counted for and comprehended is by the technocratic understanding of technology is the quantifiable, the economic, and the tangible, and crucially, it misses the sociological and political in terms of genuine citizenship, empowerment, and rights. So what we need to do is to move beyond merely a technological understanding of technology. So questions such as, do we want smart citizens or in a knowledge economy, or do we want people empowered by technology leading a dignified life in an equitable society? These are questions and important concerns about technology and inequality that we need to put a spotlight on, which concern the need for genuine modernity in our economy. Now, these are the two questions that actually form the basis of our work on technology and inequality, as you can see here. And what we did, now let me go to the empirical work, since I've raised several thematic and conceptual concerns and issues here. So now let's go to the empirical part of the work. What we did, we actually adopted what is known as ethno-methodological and discourse analysis. What we did was that we looked at 3 field sites. The first field site, what we call as home ground, being the origin, the native ground of many migrant workers, that is rural Jharkhand. My colleague did the field work over there. I personally did not go there. He did all the field work in Jharkhand. We traced many of these workers when they came to Bangalore, and even if it is not the exact workers whom we spoke to over there, we traced many workers who belonged to the same kind of communities and backgrounds in the same regions in Jharkhand. We traced them over here in migrant construction worker colonies in Bangalore. That was the second field site. And the third field site is actually a composite of several field sites. That is migrants who have domiciled in Bangalore who have been benefited with exogenous technological interventions. So these are the 3 field sites we did our inquiry on technology and inequality. We actually looked at these things when we studied these social groups. What is the technological gaze of these respondents? How do they perceive technology? What is their engagement with technology? What is, how do they ascribe meaning to the technologies that they engage with on a daily basis? How do they do the technologies? That is, what is the doing of the technologies? In other words, the technological praxis. And we decided, therefore, to problematize the raw experience of technological engagement, which actually renders supposedly naturalized technological facts actually as sociological accomplishments. So what we did was we gathered mostly qualitative, ethnographic, actually ethnomethodological data on knowledge settings and actions, whereby we elicited information on shared principles, on routines, on artifacts, on processes, on what the social structure is like, what the spatial makeup is like, and very importantly about decision making around technologies, about the mitigation of inequality, about empowerment, and whether they express politically, culturally, and whether they use technologies to express politically, culturally, and economically. Now, across these 3 field sites, the ethnomethodology and discourse analysis asked, what has been the experience with the artifacts that respondents own or are associated with? What do these technologies mean for these people and these social groups? What is the role that technology plays in the settings they're associated with, either immediately or at a distance? How do their interpersonal, intercultural, social and other occupational relations how are they influenced with these technologies? What would they look like without these technologies? So the analysis allowed us to deconstruct the technology inequality interface among the subaltern, to deconstruct everyday technological routines, to deconstruct supposedly naturalized technological conditions and practices, and to unearth new avenues for heterogeneity in socio-technological experience among them. So what we found out in site number 1, that is the home ground in Jharkhand, this was mostly drawn from, my colleague did all the work over there, and he actually found out from a lot of qualitative observations that, well, naturally they're organic, they are in an organic setting, they have cultural, environmental and social familiarity with that setting because, well, they simply belong there. But what was very interesting was the thriving technological practice in this rural setting. You had very unfortunately, I must say that I'm not allowed to put up the photographs over here for various reasons, ethical and so on, and otherwise. So I'm not allowed to show you the pictures over here because we've just sent in the reports to the funders and it's in that process. So, it's really very unfortunate. I can't show you photographs of the kind of technological contraptions and the little devices that they made on their own, but I can describe it to you in the sense that they found solutions for their localized adversities, for their conditions in their own settings by putting together the resources that they had immediately at hand, by digging into and exploiting their own social networks that they had, and by deploying gut ingenuity to create small solutions for themselves, using transportation technologies, using transportation artifacts such as cycles, motorcycles, small machines, iron boxes, and several other things in order to help them cope up with the effects of socio-economic inequality at their localized level, and for that immediate solution. So it is very localized, very time-specific kind of solutions that they had come up with. So these are indeed thriving technological practices whereby you have livelihood enhancement plus some amount of creativity, and therefore technology in that field helped in the mitigation of local adversity. Now let's come to the second site, that is the migrant construction worker colony in Bangalore, where many individuals came from exactly those backgrounds to work as migrant construction workers over here. This is something that I personally did, a survey and discourse analysis of 142 Jharkhand-originated construction workers across 2 camps in Bangalore. And of course, what would you expect? It's very, very commonsensical that you would not have technological creativity over here in the kind of places they stayed. The ambience that they stayed in, these camps that they stayed in, even though they were very well appointed, I can't of course disclose the names of the regions or the companies, that it's outside of the ethics for me to do that. So over there, they were very well appointed, their staying quarters, their medical facilities, their transportation, even their wages. It was actually one of those rare cases where in these 2 labor camps you had very good facilities for them, but at the same time there was immobility. They were depoliticized, they were alienated, they were estranged for natural reasons, and for obvious reasons, sorry. And whatever technologies that they had, basically what? Mobile phones, tiny little objects around themselves, which mostly they did not own, they served principally in the spheres of recreation and family communication and bonding. Even cultural expression was only recreational. It is almost obvious to say that. In the third field site, you had migrants benefiting from exogenously introduced technology. So what we did was a survey and discourse analysis of potters, blacksmiths, tailors, and cobblers, who were all assisted by civil society organizations who had given them technologies to improve their livelihoods. Over here, we saw that they were quite happy with those technologies given to them. They enhanced their livelihoods, but there was negligible creativity around those technologies. Okay, so here are 3 quite contrasting field sites about migrant workers in Bangalore, essentially a subaltern social group, if we can use subalternity in that definition, where in their home ground, tremendous amount of creative technological engagement. That is in field 1, you can see here that you had thriving technological practice via frugal invention. You had empowerment, creativity, agency, and these posed a strong subaltern response to inequality, whereby the naturalized technological outcome emerged as a creative technological engagement. Whereas in field 2, you had technological stuntedness, if I could use that word, where people owned technologies, but there was no response to subalternity and inequality. And to a great extent, this socio-economic subalternity and technological subalternity was also reinforced. While in the third field, migrants with exogenous intervention, you had empowerment but no creativity, where you had active technological engagement. It did combat adversity, but nothing more than that. The first thing we did with these kind of findings, and unfortunately, of course, this is a very small space for me to go on about the depth of those findings, but the first thing we did was try to theorize these findings. Okay, so the first thing we did was understand that in the organic settings, that is in the rural sites, you had the integration of the natural, the technical, and the social. That is, there was a synthesis of technology and what Martin Heidegger called as life world practice. To theorize this, we drew from the works of 2 major philosophers of technology, Martin Heidegger and secondly Andrew Feenberg. These 2 philosophers, who Andrew Feenberg to a great extent critiqued Heidegger and moved on theoretically and conceptually from there. In the organic rural setting, you had the synthesis of the natural, technical, and social environments, because of which there was technological creativity in forms of frugal invention, And here, socio-technological inequality was battled. But in the migrant worker colony, which was a very alienated and depoliticized setting, you had the natural and the social environment quite divorced from the technical. Therefore, you had a split between life world practice and technology, whereby the relationship to technology becomes what Heidegger called coldly rationalized and essentialized, because of which there's little technical creativity, even as frugal intervention, even in the form of frugal invention. So technological and socio-economic subalternity became reinforced. The third field site was somewhere in between. So we can theorize, we attempted to theorize that the character of the socio-spatial setting shapes the technological discourse in that is how people talk about the technological gaze, as what I said right in the beginning, and that shapes the technological engagement. So basically, whether the socio-spatial setting has immobile, depoliticized, alienated or not, shapes the principles, rituals, and meaning-making of the technologies, and therefore the outcome that results in the outcomes of the technological practice outcomes and condition. What we also realized in this attempt at theorizing this was that socio-spatial character is central. Belongingness, rootedness, politicization, human bonding, dispossession, so on, were actually central. So what we did was we borrowed one very recent conceptual development called the proximity principle. This actually comes from the field of psychology, where and we've all faced this at every point in our lives. That is where your immediate space around you biases your intuition. It's a very well established thing in psychology studies. What we did was we pulled it towards technology. That is, the nature of the immediate space around you biases even your technological intuition. The nature of the space reconfigures the nature of subalternity and therefore of technological practice also. So where you are essentially tweaks your technological intuition also. So spatiality was therefore discovered as being cardinal for technology as much as society. So the society-technology relationship is something that is very well established in the literature for decades now. It's nothing new at all. But what we saw as a novel finding over here was that spatiality there is a discursive coupling of social, technological and spatial, which determines the technological response to inequality in each setting. So the socio-spatial is therefore at the heart of the subaltern technological engagement in conditions of inequality, which determines whether the subaltern technological engagement reproduces inequality or mitigates it. It determines whether technology is experienced within subalternity or whether the socio-technological inequality is normalized. So if I could just put it very briefly, the nature of socio-spatiality via the proximity principle, which talks about the intuition thanks to space, the nature of socio-spatial inequality causes a life-world technology split, which renders people as subordinate to the technologies that they operate, reinforcing subalternity, including technological subalternity, which becomes the naturalized technological condition. The nature of socio-spatiality, if favorable, now this is if it is unfavorable, if it is alienated, depoliticized and so on. If it is favorable, if it is organic, if there is a certain sense of belongingness, if there is some root in it, then via the proximity principle, this leads to a life world technology synthesis, which pushes up frugal technological activity and battles subalternity and inequality. So the nature of socio-spatial inequality via the proximity principle causes either of these two things or something in between. Okay, so with this, we went on to actually realize that this is extremely important. That is, technological agency exercised by frugal technological engagement is a weapon against inequality, as we have seen, especially in field site 1. Genuine technological modernity happens where technological agency is instigated. That is, genuine technological modernity happens when the LT synthesis happens, which transforms into empowerment and creativity. And we need to counter the hegemonic technological paradigms which legitimize only systemic formal activity as mainstream innovation, because it is highly likely that frugal technological activity might even be the dominant technological regime in India. And that is where LT synthesis, according to this theorization, can happen. Okay. Now, there is abundant denouncement of frugal technological activity as unscientific, unscalable, having no technological base of support, unable to support a wide spectrum of users. Innovation, according to this line of thought, is that technological activity which adheres only to the principles of economic rationality and economic concerns in an organizational setting with systematic and structured processes. So it's not just that there exists a strong hierarchy of innovation, but that many elements of frugal inventive activity are not even recognized as legitimate activity, like legitimate technological activity in the first place. The technological engagement of subaltern groups is certainly not characterized by the absence, weakness, or impotency of technological engagement, as we have seen very well over here. The technological responses of these subaltern groups to situations of socio-economic distress can actually be very layered and very dynamic, and actually calls for much greater scholarly inquiry in India. So shouldn't innovation also not include such innovation in the definitional sense, also not include expressions of technological agency and resource improvisation that generate sparks of survival? Such technological agency can be realized via frugal technological practice, which is essentially theoretically where LT syntheses happen and where LT splits don't happen. When we analyze the technological engagement of disadvantaged socioeconomic individuals or communities, it's important for us to reorient our very understanding of technology from their perspective and deepen our understanding of technological practice as such. Now, there are various ways in which frugal technological practice can happen at an LT synthesis. Take, for instance, frugal invention, which is quite mockingly and condescendingly termed as jugaad in the Indian colloquial parlance. The mainstream scholarly and just a moment, please. The mainstream scholarly and policy literature on technology in India at best recognizes grassroots technologies, but clearly ignores frugal invention in the wide spectrum of technological possibility. But there is still a growing body of literature that wholeheartedly endorses frugal invention as not just legitimate technological practice, but an activity that seriously deserves scholarly attention and more foregrounding in academia and policy. Frugal technological invention in this literature is actually recognized as a powerful weapon of mitigation in response to subalternity and inequality. Frugal invention is not some simple random venture by some unschooled individuals, but in fact a testimony to tapping opportunity and resourcefulness in adversity, characterized by flexibility, nimbleness, and simplicity, and that which is not bound by formal constraints or requiring any high technological complexity. Frugal invention does not seek to compete with structured innovation cultures, because very importantly, by the way, it has been observed, frugal technological practice has been observed to comfortably and legitimately operate even within formal large technological institutions and establishments, even scientific establishments and laboratories. Because in these institutions, people, I mean, as you would also know, people routinely recycle and reuse immediately available materials. People rapidly experiment. People deploy gut ingenuity. Whether they operate in a scientific laboratory, in a science laboratory, or whether in a white-collar corporate enterprise, or even a rural agrarian setting, or across manufacturing, or wherever else. In fact, many studies have propounded that frugal invention might even be India's cultural and vocational answers to the various vagaries and insufficiencies in Indian life. So it's not just some eccentric creation to develop some freakish quick fixes, but actually processes that produce affordable, user-friendly, and easily serviceable technologies of survival, which have been created through socio-technical ecologies of users. And besides jugaad, there is so much more. There's collective invention and defensive innovation, which was analyzed by the literature, especially in the Industrial Revolution in the West. Already there is a well-established and well-researched family of grassroots innovation, and surely there are many more strategies and activities that can constitute what is collectively termed here as frugal technological practice. It is definitely an instrument of power, reflecting the understanding of social groups and the physical world around them. It offers promise, hope, and mobility against the lived realities of inequality, and to a great extent, frugal technologies are therefore technological weapons of the week, if I can use that term. So now, how do we go about prodding policy to recognize this? As the last part of my talk, let me just put this forward. I propose 3 directions: diffusion-related interventions, incentive-related interventions, and paradigm shifts in technological technological thinking. Now, however great frugal technological culture is, there is certainly a lot of issues around it, such as the over-localization of these technologies, the over-localization of the socio-technological capital, the isolation, the detachment from external actors, the lack of existing tinkerable solutions in the market. These are all serious issues that plague frugal technological culture. So what we proposed was several interventions, as you can see here: local demonstrations of frugal technologies and dedicated frugal technology exhibitions. Why not set up a frugal technology version of the Honeybee network, which is already there? Why not use social media to upload demonstrations of frugal technologies? After all, the permeation of social media in rural India is spectacular these days. All you have to do is just look for personal expressions of creativity and so on. You will see how much rural India is actually engaged with social media. So why not tap that to allow interactions between inventors and users in digital space? Because the whole idea of intellectual property and those kind of paradigms don't apply here at all. In fact, in the field work, we asked whether, we asked, and my colleague also especially had asked, whether is there any issue with people stealing this? And the word steal didn't really come up here at all. It didn't really, that the vocabulary didn't apply here at all. Everyone was sort of free to just pick it up because nobody was actually looking for a profit. Nobody was actually looking for they were looking for solutions for their local issues and not to create some sort of intellectual property which they wanted to protect. Why not set up local competitions for user-led incremental innovation? Very importantly, why not encourage user-led incremental innovation on exogenously intervened low technologies which are already there in the market? And of course, to support all this, financial incentives for developing tinkerable low technologies by large companies. Now, over here we have, of course, the state, which takes an important role, academia, which takes some important role, but very importantly, civil society, which comes at the center of all these interventions. And also, it's quite, it would actually be quite important for, going back to the state, it's very important for the state to have some certain large-scale paradigm shifts in the thinking around technology. Now, noble as it may seem, the Digital India program, DI over here, has no mention of frugal technological practice at all. At best, it visits the idea of grassroots innovation, but it does not go, quote-unquote, lower than that. Now, a mere mention of frugal technological practice may not be substantial enough to make some great difference to this paradigm, but it is an important start for a top-down recognition. So, there's something called the Digital India Empowerment List. And promotion of local technological cultures ought to be included in that list. So what will happen in this manner, not only will there be a top-down recognition of this frugal technological practice, but also a bottom-up feeding from the ground level technological systems to Digital India and also to the National Innovation Foundation. So this is quite apart from the usual digital literacy, which both DI and NIAS strongly support. One final policy intervention could also be to provide benefits to corporations, larger corporate firms and so on, that support frugal technological creations and intervention in any form. So it might be possible for the state to incentivize the design, to incentivize the funding of the design, and also incentivize the involvement of private profit-making firms into frugal technological empowerment through a tool which has been quite effective, that is corporate social responsibility. Okay, it would actually be quite interesting to see whether these formal technological establishments actually capture some local technological solutions, and some feedback can go from top down also. So to finally conclude, the technology policy attention has been meager in the context of subaltern groups, except when they are cast as passive beneficiaries of programs and schemes. these kind of subaltern groups who have been at the receiving end of socio-economic inequality, they have rarely been respectfully viewed by policy as technological agents. And they've never been invited as stakeholders in priority setting and in policy making around technology. The technocratic establishment in India needs a paradigm shift towards deeper social reflections on these lines. And this blindsiding is actually appalling given the magnitude of the proportion of the marginalized social groups in India, in India's population, given the fact that they are disproportionately on the front lines of economic distress and inequality, and the near universality of frugal technological practices among them. So we can propose that frugal technological practices are technological weapons of the weak, and the subaltern do respond to inequality by speaking, but they speak technologically very often. This is, of course, not to suggest being cynical or pessimistic of the technology inequality relationship. In fact, there is much promise, because technology can indeed fuel progressive dynamism from an improved democratic participation, but we have to broaden our technological aspirations from just jazzy visualizations and device sophistication. We have to broaden it to include imaginaries of genuine modernity and genuine dignity and empowerment for the bulk of the Indian population who form the underclasses and the socio-historically disadvantaged. Social justice and technological modernity are not an either-or choice, and they can weave together as warp and weft. The technological question should move away from potentially exclusionary themes such as smart cities, or it should move away from the valorization of gig economy jobs as some sort of future of work, and move much more towards employing technologies that can truly slow down the further precaritization of the masses of distressed workers and can strike at the modern incarnations of discrimination and oppression. So I end with saying that all these concerns and all these understandings of technology and inequality can be addressed when our vision of technological progress places human development rather than technological development at its core. So that is all I have to say. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to take questions.
Hello. It was a good talk and nice work and presented very well. My question is, how did you observe the technological literacy among, the subaltern?
Technological?
Literacy.
Literacy?
Yeah, because even for implementing frugal technologies, they must know some of the technological interventions while maybe during their education, or they might look into the nature and they might implement it. So how do you correlate the technological literacy, what they have gained during their process of implementing these technologies, and how policy making can be inclusive? How policy making can be inclusive to consider that also in the framework of policy making?
Hello, thank you for that interesting talk. So I want to understand, very much similar to what he has asked, maybe an extension of it. Can you tell us what kind of frugal innovation or technological intervention has taken place in these places? If you can. And also to understand, you mentioned about considering it in digital India. So very curious to understand, do they also doing technological intervention towards more in software kind of innovation, or is it more of a mechanical, like as you mentioned, cycles and so, right? So that, and the extent of this technology innovation, how it is at the level where, to be considered useful for companies, the technology companies or so. Is it at a level where technology companies or government can look there and say, okay, this is very innovative and we should consider it? Or so I just want to understand that, yeah.
Sir, so the lack of creativity that you found among the migrant workers in Bengaluru, do you think it is because of material factors such as lack of time or lack of resources, or do you think it is because of let's say more psychological factors such as people not feeling that they belong to that community or not caring about the surroundings that they live in.
Hello. So my question is, when you say that a new technological policy framework is required to include this form of, so what do you mean by including this form of technological agency, and do we have any such framework, examples of this framework from maybe some other countries where this has been done? And I just want to understand majorly what is meant by including this form. So is it in terms of recognizing the technologies or the intellectual property there, or what is it that we mean by including this? Yeah.
Sorry if I've missed it in the presentation, but what qualifies as creativity and what is the definition of creativity? I would love to know that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. I'll try and address them as best as I can. It's a little hard to define exactly what creativity is. It's a little difficult. When in the inequality program, we first sought out to get our definitions clear. What is technology? I mean, that sort of in some way is connected to the question of what qualifies as creativity. We actually adopted several definitions and made a very composite understanding of what we thought was technology in the first place. It started with even understandings from John Desmond Bernal and so on. We adopted this definition of technology where, first and foremost, it is the modification of nature. Any modification of nature as technology. That's the definition at the nucleus of that definition is that any modification of nature. By that extension, any modification of nature and any modification of technology for the purposes of either efficiency, productivity, recreation, or even artistic purposes, creativity, we considered as creativity. Okay, anything that makes your life better, anything that makes your whatever economic activity that you're doing, if it makes that better, anything that improves efficiency, any modification of nature or any modification of an existing technology that does this, that's creativity. So that casts a very, very wide net on what creativity and technology are about. To a good extent, actually, that was very helpful because there are a lot of things that are frugal technologies that come into this definition. So we thought, why not? That is also creativity. That is also technology very much. So I have not directly answered the question, but I've used our definition of technology to even qualify what we thought of as creative technologies. Okay. What do I mean by including in policy framework? Like you had mentioned yourself, first of all, a recognition. The literature has shown that even the grassroots innovation literature does not respect frugal technologies. To some extent, it even mocks it. Whereas the grassroots inventions were themselves mocked for a long time as something that was very low level, unscalable, and so on and so on. And which has very little, it doesn't fit into the formal definitions of technology. The grassroots innovation literature in token has done this to the frugal technology practice also. So a recognition of this in the first place. Now, the first thing that this recognition does is seriously mess things up because it makes the whole world very messy. How many things will you include then? Somebody doing something even at home in one's private space. Somebody doing something as I'm sitting here, I can do something. How do we document that? How do you regard that? It opens up a lot of mess, if I can use that word very casually. It does open up things very messily, but then that is how we open up a paradigm shift in thinking, by engaging in that mess. So the first thing is by including it. The second thing is like what we saw in the policy suggestions and all over here, by placing these in more public fora, whether via social media or via exhibitions, I think we'll gain further clarity on inclusion over there. Okay, by posing this in a more public sphere, we will be able to even define what we call as frugal technologies in the first place. Okay, now the lack of technological creativity due to lack of resources or time, to some extent, yes, they don't have many things around them in a labor colony, right? But at the same time, they don't have those many things around them in their rural setup also. Then it's not abundant with resources. what we found out was that they actually go to these nearest scrap centers, or they look out for what their neighbors are doing and see, oh, you're throwing this away, maybe this is useful for me. You know, gut ingenuity and resourcefulness under your nose is what they use. Second thing is that I spoke to a couple of civil society organizations that deal with migrant workers who have actually used technologies for addressing grievances and doing things like that, and they've been very novel about it. Okay, organizations such as the Ajivika Bureau, for instance, which I was in conversation with for a short time while doing this research, they said that they use their mobile phones in order to broadcast and air things that are going on, not just in terms of worker grievances, but in terms of many, many other things that they're doing in their locale. It's such a simple thing when you say it. You basically shoot it and you distribute it. But even that can very much be some sort of technological creativity, because nobody has done that before in that way. They were quite amazed by this. So the lack of technological creativity is certainly cannot be greatly alluded to the lack of resources or the lack of time. But we theorized that, like what you correctly said, we theorized that it could be because of the nature of the socio-spatial ambience. Whereas in the rural, it's a much richer ambience, sociologically as well as spatially, whereby, like the LT synthesis showed, there was an integration of the natural, technical and social environment. Here, on the other hand, that has been divorced, that has been split apart. So that is one reason we theorized that that is the driver for technological creativity. The next one is about, I didn't actually, well, one thing is that, of course, for all you know, formal technological organizations, companies and so on might actually find this useful. They might actually find useful some solutions which came right on the ground. We don't know. But for that, we'll have to, first of all, acknowledge and cast out our net to see what useful things can be found. Right? So we don't know yet. It's still a large virgin ground that can be exploited. In the same way, there might be something in those larger establishments that frugal technological culture can be can benefit from. So a much greater dialogue between various technological cultures will be able to exactly answer this question of how useful it is for companies and so on. How to describe it? Yes, I feel so handicapped that I'm not able to show you these photographs for various, for various reasons, but they involved reassembling motorcycles for things. They involved reassembling iron boxes for things. They involved reassembly of many other transportation technologies and parts of that for all kinds of things that they were doing. One can only picture it. In fact, an easy way to do is to just type jugaad on Google and you'll see all kinds of things. All right, so that's what essentially we were looking at. But the difference was that these were not just some, like what I said, some freakish quick fixes. They were there to resolve issues of adversity then and there. And where we studied this in rural Jharkhand, the setting there is that of severe agrarian distress. And they're trying to cope up with, in the process of coping up with that distress, frugal technologies come as a great solution for local issues of livelihood, local issues of productivity and efficiency. How policy making can be more inclusive? Some of those things I had already mentioned, that is publicize them, put them in the public domain more, document them, encourage them to be as part of social media, at the same time give incentives for it, whether in terms of incentives within the domain of CSR or any such incentives otherwise, to engage with frugal technology much, much more. Okay, and the final thing, which is actually the first question, I don't know if I've understood this right, but are we talking about technological literacy among the subaltern? Did we talk about that? That sort of vocabulary is actually outside of the horizon of this, that is technological literacy. As it is, I started off by talking about what the definition of technology itself is. So they are technologically literate, but their definition of technology is very different from ours. Okay, so their engagement with these materials, with these kind of contraptions, definitely signals a literacy, but very different from the kind of literacy that, say, all of us in this room are familiar with. The whole paradigm of, the whole paradigmatic thinking itself must change when we talk about a term such as technical literacy. Many of these individuals are unschooled. They may not be illiterate, but they may not be non-literate, but they are certainly, for the most part, unschooled. They have, in my survey of them, barely anybody has gone beyond grade 6, 7, 8, that sort of thing. Most of them belong to other backward classes and belong to communities which are in the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They belong to those in a very, very subaltern group. So a lot of them come from socio-historically deprived groups which don't have that sort of technical literacy, the kind that say you and I have, or the kind that more advantaged and affluent people, affluent social groups have. So what we need to do is just redefine what we call as technical literacy. And we will see that they are also technically very, very literate, except that their literacy and their technology are different. There is one very important thing I must say, which I forgot very importantly to say, that I am not in any way mapping a one-to-one mapping between subaltern groups and frugal technologies and affluent groups and formal technologies. No. Subaltern social groups are very much capable of engaging in formal technological culture. But one thing I did mention was that more sophisticated, more urbane, more affluent social groups, such as even in institutions like this, very much engage in frugal technological culture. So anybody is capable of engaging in any technological culture. It's something that I should have actually mentioned, but let me take this opportunity to say that. Okay. Any more questions, please?
Hello. Why do you think that frugal technological developments stop when we look at urban communities or such? Like, why isn't there some sort of frugal jugaad based solutions in urban contexts? Like, why is it always in the subaltern that it is more prioritized?
Well, actually, I did clarify just now that I'm not putting a one-to-one mapping, that the subaltern and or the rural are frugal, whereas over here it is not. No, I just mentioned that now. That is, there is a lot of frugal technological activity going on in the urban. There's a lot of frugal technological activity going on even in an institution like this. All right. In fact, there is a PhD thesis. I can tell you details about it if you write to me. There is a PhD thesis in which there has been a study of this sort of frugal technological culture in this very institution. Okay, which is of course at the frontier of science research in India, and even over here, people at the front, very eminent individuals, very well-established laboratories, all of them do engage in this. So let's leave aside the urban. Even in an institution like this, it happens. So like what I was just saying at the end, it doesn't stop there. Frugal activity happens everywhere, which is why I think one of those things it says that it may even perhaps be the dominant technological praxis, or there's a word missing there, the dominant technological practice in India. It may be so. Okay.
So a lot of work is going on in rural India. If I talk about structural designing, that's what my background is. So a lot of new construction materials we have been working on, but there's still a resistance, as you say, jugaad, frugal technologies and all. But unless that is registered in a code book that the civil engineers follow, it doesn't give authenticity. But still, we would love to promote the new materials and stop using concrete. So we are trying to do in some places, as Kerala tourism, Uttarakhand, but still there is some resistance from the government side, from other side, because the material still isn't registered in the code books, and registering into the code books takes another era or 7 births, because there's a academia and industry academia difference exists, as you know, especially in the construction industry. So how to promote frugal technologies considering the construction industry part?
I wouldn't be able to answer very specifically about construction, but construction is actually a superb domain in which a lot of frugal technological activity happens. Yes, very much. In fact, what we call as, I'm well outside of this domain, but please tell me if I'm wrong, that what we call as modern architecture is actually a great departure from what construction has been like in history in general. I'm sure it is the case. Well, like I said, policy itself has to have a top-down approach in the first place. Only when you have a top-down approach will including that in the code books be, will it be easy? I guess the answer is within the question itself. That is, for the code books to, I guess both scholars as well as civil society should be the ones to stretch and expand those code books more, even if industry doesn't do it. I can understand the resistance within industry because they are answerable for efficiency. They are answerable to so many things. So I wouldn't exactly blame them for not putting it in, but I guess it is up to us, scholars as well as civil society, to stretch those books a bit in order to expand the idea of technology as such. I think, well, this is not exactly frugal technology, but more traditional. But I remember even when a great architect like Laurie Baker, for instance, had used all kinds of materials and all kinds of processes to build his creations, many were outside of the conventional code books. And because of not only the artistic but also the economic benefits of his creations, those were testimony to those practices, and then they got included in the book. So maybe the outcomes should speak for themselves. Maybe over time, when the outcomes speak for themselves, the code books will open up, perhaps. So that's why. But the answer is well within the question itself. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there are no more questions. Thank you, Dr. Kamath, for this engaging lecture, and thank you to the audience for posing such intriguing questions so that we had this wonderful discussion. May I request my colleague Anant Padmanabhan to please give a token of appreciation to Dr. Kamath. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Kamath, and we hope to have you more often at IISc at giving such lectures, public lectures. Please join for a cup of tea outside.